Okay, so we are still missing a couple of people. Carl spontaneously joined us, but I think we can begin. We can see if they still join us. Okay, so just give me a sec. And then we can start. Hello and welcome to the first session of Objects in the Realm of Shadows by Andrei, Chitu. I will now read the seminar description and Andrei Chitu's biography. Philosophy, amongst other things, is a process of decluttering the theoretical space by framing the objects or the concepts that populate it not as things, but as reflective abstractions. The universe of theory is a realm of shadow, as Hegel puts it, a space of contours, forms, and reflections, where the objects of thought gets its shape and specificity. It denies thus the seeming concreteness of things, as well as the evident character of immediate experience and dispositions. As such, far from being just a method, philosophy has a core of theoretical commitments, which will be the topic of this seminar. As it will otherwise run the danger of generating a caput mortuum, this seminar will not only enumerate a series of principles, but will also deduce them by setting them in opposition to other trends in the cluttered field of contemporary theory. Instead of searching for common ground as one of the commitments that will be discussed, we will proceed as if truth is a matter of distinction. Therefore, if we try resisting various domestications of Hegel, both in analytic philosophy and psychoanalysis, we will discover a much weirder author, one who can help us formulate irritating theses for philosophical, artistic, and political practice in our world. We will use the notion of the object as a guiding thread in the reconstruction of Hegel's logic, a work that will be framed as being the furthest away from today's post-critical theory and various forms of object-oriented ontology. Andrei Chitu studied philosophy, history, and theology at the University of Tübingen and University of Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne. Chitu researches alienation in online cultures, as well as the subject of political education for the youth. He is preparing his PhD thesis on a possible link between Hegel's logic and a new conception of minimalism in the arts. In addition to Hegel, Chitu's interests are aligned with the tradition of critical theory, psychoanalysis, and contemporary aesthetics. He also co-translated Kocheva's lectures on Hegel's phenomenology to Romanian. Andrei, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Very nice to see you all here. And I would like to start with a short introduction round. Just state your name and your interest in Hegel, or other things that you want to share. And then I will discuss a bit the syllabus and the readings for the seminar, and then we'll proceed from there. Want to start from my left with which Stefan, and then just go around. You're muted.
Now it's
yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm Stefano Donescu, and I'm working on a PhD thesis currently on the relationship between nature and spirit. And Hegel plays here a crucial role with regard to the concept of spirit more than that of nature. Yeah.
David?
Yeah. Hi, I'm David. I'm I finished my PhD thesis, and I got really into Hegel while I was finishing it up, and on the theme of kind of progress and innovation and newness, but kind of drawing on Hegel for negativity and negation, so that I tried to kind of defend some idea of progress, but dodging a kind of Whiggish or complacently optimistic idea of innovation. So that's how I got into Hegel, and I'm keen to consolidate my understanding of the logic. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Victor would be now to the right of David.
Yes. Hello everybody. My name is Dogaro Victor. I have a license and a master thesis, both of them on Hegel. My license concerned the relationship between Kant and Hegel in philosophy of history regarding the concept of time. And my master thesis, I worked on basically some crucial chapters from the logic of essence, identity, difference, and diversity. And I'm looking forward to see a lot of Hegel discussions going on in this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you. Hanan?
Yes, hello. My name is Hernan. I am from Buenos Aires, Argentina. My background is in natural sciences, biochemistry specifically. I gained an interest in philosophy, say 3 years back. So I'm actually now finishing my new center certificate with this seminar. Excited about that. I'm currently writing a paper on a comparison of process ontologies, Deleuze versus Sellers. And my interest in the course, well, I haven't had too much of a chance to familiarize myself with Hegelian philosophy. My knowledge is pretty superficial, so I wanted to correct that. That's it.
Thank you. Adriana?
Hi, I'm Adriana. I'm an artist in New York, and I'm here. I want to develop deeper understanding of Hegel.
Thank you. Carl?
Yes, hello. Yeah, I'm working on a PhD thesis on sort of the use of geographical and geological metaphors and analogies in the history of mind and consciousness. I'm quite a naive reader of Hegel. I've dabbled a little bit with in the phenomenology, but I mean, really, that's about it in terms of reading Hegel directly. So I'm quite excited for this.
Yeah. And Raphael, I think.
Yes. Hello. I come from international relations. Actually, I am a master's student. I am trying to write my master's dissertation now. It's about representations of labor, the everyday life, and the capacity of imagining capitalist futurities, focusing on specific, like I analyzed 2 documentaries that portray narratives and representations around the concept of labor. So I'm interested in Hegel precisely for the concept of labor itself, and that's pretty much why I'm here for, and also to get a better grasp on both the science of logic, which I didn't have a contact before, only through secondary sources, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Federico? Next one.
Hello, everybody. I'm currently finishing a master thesis about anti-humanism and Derrida. I'm a bit bored about the subject to this point. Nevertheless, I've had a previous contact with Hegel during a seminar in my university that was wonderful about the phenomenology of spirit. And since then, I've been interested in Hegel. Plus, my interest also lies in how neo-rationalism uses enlightenment. So I think this will be a great way to get further into Hegel, but I've been interested and reading the encyclopedia as well, very slowly.
Great. Evrim?
Hi. I wrote my master thesis on Levinas, but this was many years ago.
Now I'm making PhD applications to work on Deleuze. My proposal is on Deleuze and the problem of domination. And this is my third class in the new center. Yeah, I guess that's all.
Okay, thank you. Alexei?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I'm a certificate student at the new center, and I really like the description of this course. And I never read Hegel, but I thought that's a perfect chance to actually do it under the guidance. Thanks.
Thank you. And Regis, I think is the...
Sorry, I'm without the camera, but maybe later I can turn it on. And I studied philosophy in São Paulo, in Brazil. And now I'm finishing my master dissertation on Hegel, on science of logic. I was supposed to study Hegel's concept of Begriff, of notion, but actually I focused more on the doctrine of essence. And now I'm thinking what I'm going to do for my PhD. I'm going to apply for a PhD this year and next year. And this is my second seminar on New Center, and I'm very excited about this seminar for obvious reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Ekin?
Hi. My name is Ekin Erkan. I'm a Turkish writer living in New York. I attended Columbia for my master's. And now I will be either going to NYU or City University at the Graduate Center of New York to pursue my doctoral study. Yeah, in philosophy, and I mainly approach Hegel in my research and writing from the position of Brandon McDowell and post-Larsian inferentialism. Albeit also Badiou and other contemporary Hegelians, and contrasting those similarities and differences in approach in the logic.
Right. Thank you. I'll try to work to the syllabus and explain the individual sessions and what I'm personally looking forward to do. Which is a reconstruction of the logic from the standpoint of the object of thought, the various meanings of the word objects in the logic, be it the object of thought in a Kantian sense, let's say, or object as a finite thing, or a various category as an object of thought. And this, by following some key passages in the logic, for those of you who are familiar with it, we will discuss mainly the transitions, the beginning of the logic, the transition from the logic of being and the logic of essence, and then the transition from the logic of essence to the logic of concept. The last session we will read the 20 pages at the beginning of the logic of concept, where we try to answer the question what a concept is and what differentiates a Hegelian understanding of concept from other understandings of concepts, including, for example, what distinguishes a concept from an object. My personal interests in this, I'm very much, I wrote also my bachelor thesis on the phenomenology of spirit, my master thesis on the science of logic. And I'm looking now to try to define a notion of minimalism, of what, which is both in regard to arts, also with minimalism as a lack of presupposition, for example, the notion of limit. I thought about the seminar as being a 2.5 hour sessions. The first, we will try to have a very close reading of the primary literature, the primary text on Hegel, and then try to contrast it with various other texts that engage either critically with Hegel or have a completely other form of understanding of the task at hand, the subject at hand, or try to use Hegel, to thinking in a Hegelian way to pursue other goals or further goals in philosophy. I will now try to walk to the individual sessions. The first one, we try to define what is in a Hegelian sense finitude. By this, the purpose of it is to think about what Hegel understands as a presupposition, and this to contrast it with other forms of finitude. Why Hegel decides, which has been puzzling in the literature, and is more or less one of the famous parts of the history of philosophy, why should one start with pure being and not with a finite thing, a finite determination? For example, Adorno in the Negative Dialectics said that Hegel should have started with a determinate something, for example, as the first category. Now, why Hegel does this will be the question of today. And then to contrast this understanding of pure being, why should that be at the beginning of the science of logic, and not, for example, finitude? I hope you all got the readings. The opponent of today will be Heidegger, which has this understanding of being as meaning. Robert Brandom, for example, says, I think in the Tales of the Mighty Dead, that for Heidegger, the meaning of being is the being of meaning. Why does, for example, Hegelian authors like Adorno think that is a problem? In a second session, we'll look at the concept of, for example, of becoming, and how this transition from being to essence, how is to be understood that distinction between being and essence has to do with the notion of what Hegel will call immanent critique. And then we will look at various texts, for example, how Heidegger understands this ontological difference between being and beings, what separates, for example, a Hegelian distinction between being of essence from an ontological difference, as Heidegger would put it. The third session, which will be the end of the logic of essence, we talk about the notion of distinction, of what the necessity of false distinctions. I believe that Hegel, through this difference between being and essence, for example, tries to distinguish between various forms of to bring a concept of truth, for example, to the fore, which is not to be understood, or the concept of appearance should not be understood as a concept of, for example, illusion and its relation to actuality. This chapter, this end of the logic of essence, is also very famous as being the one where Hegel discusses modalities like possibility, actuality, and contingency. In various parts of the Hegelian system, I think most famously, you might have heard of, is that assertion of Hegel in the Philosophy of Right, that the truth is the actual, and the rational is the actual, and the actual is the rational. And this has been in many ways criticized or embraced or tried to make it sound reasonable. And we will look exactly what the concepts of modality, of actuality, for example, teach us about reading, for example, that sentence. And all this should, at the end, bring us to the notion of the concept in Hegel, that will give us also his overarching understanding of what mindedness is, of what rationality is, of what all this links to what we could call the logical in a qualified Hegelian sense. And I intend to distinguish this, for example, ontologies that orient themselves on the object, to criticize various forms of, I think it was Pete Wolfendale who wrote about ontological liberalism, to distinguish the Hegelian notion of the notion from ontologies that orient themselves just around a notion of object. Now, if you look, for example, at the readings, it's not much. It is, I believe, for 4 sessions, a lot of text. But for every session, I distinguished between 3 amounts of 3 pensums of readings. So I think, and I will orient myself only on this essential, a minimal requirement. This will be the text that I will use for my handouts. I prepare also a handout for today. But still, I think it will be like 30, 40 pages per session almost, except the last one. And yes, if you have any questions until this moment, please feel free anytime to ask questions, or if I talk too fast, too slow, too loud, too unclear, please tell me. If not, I will try now to give a general introduction of what I take to be the project of the logic, and of the various topics that we'll meet in them. So there are various stories about Hegel's development. One of the constants is his interest in what he calls logic and metaphysics. He taught his first course on topics of logic that are also recurring in this final book form around 1801, when he was still, I believe, a PhD student or habilitation student in Jena, and working closely with Schelling. And then for almost every semester, he taught, so every second semester until the publication of the Phenomenology of Spirit, he taught a course on logics and metaphysics, and also courses for high school students when he was in Nuremberg. The publication of the Science of Logic took many years. The first edition, which is the first edition of the Logic of Being, is published in 1812, and followed the next year in 1813 with the Logic of Essence. The Logic of the Concept will be published in 1816, and a new edition before Hegel died of cholera here in Berlin. He published a new edition of the Logic of Being. The project of the logic orients itself, I guess, around the following questions. What is science? What is a notion of science, specifically a notion of necessity, that is to be seen as the foundation of particular sciences? The second one would be the notion of what could we call formal, of what if there is something that we can call formal, distinction between form and content. I think the third one would be then a notion of philosophy itself, that should take a systematic form. So what is system? All these questions, of course, are interlinked. That necessity that should give us the concept of science in the eyes of Hegel implies also a concept of a system, that there has to be a system of possible knowledge. And all this will be, and this is will be the topic of almost all of our sessions, the distinction between form and content. What links content necessarily to an understanding of form, and in which sense form itself can be a content for thought. Then I guess we could start. We could start with, and I have a handout with exactly this question of science, the possibility of philosophical science itself. I will now try to share my screen. On the handout are all the passages for the reading of the day. So the notion of science, of philosophy as science, if you look at the first quotation, all quotations are from the Science of Logic, the Greater Logic, which has been published in, so the three parts, the logic of being, the logic of essence, they were published separately, are now understood together as the Greater Logic, not as the Encyclopedia Logic, which is a more resumed version of it than you can find in an Encyclopedia of Philosophical Science. So for Hegel, the first problem that arises when one is to understand philosophy as science or logic as science is that it cannot have its ground in a finite understanding of science. So sciences like mathematics or physics or chemistry or biology are always a separate finite domain that already has its definitions, its axioms, its own finite universe of discourse. So for Hegel, philosophy is to be seen as a science that is driven by its own content, its own understanding of the content. And only this content is the one which should give a notion of movement for knowledge. The problem of logic being preoccupied with its own determinations, with its own rules, is that its own content is generated by the own activity of thought. So the difference, for example, between Hegel and an author like Plato is that it sees thinking not necessarily as a form of contemplation, but as a form of activity that constantly reflects upon itself. And by doing this, it generates the content that should be then the notion of logic. The problem, if you look in, for example, in secondary literature, you have this absolutization of absolute beginning, that by contemplating the pure activity of thought, this thought should create its own content ex nihilo. I believe that Hegel itself does not see as necessarily true. It will be in a mediated way, in a more roundabout way, correct. But also this activity of thought, it's a historical one. It was one which develops in the history of philosophy, develops in the history of logic. In this sense, there will always be content that already exists there as thought forms, so the logic of Aristotle or Plato, but it does not yet have a systematic form. So if we are to study the history of logic, if we are to study the science of logic itself, we cannot uncouple it from the history of philosophy as such. So the science of logic has a double discourse. It's both a reconstruction of the science of pure thought, at the same time is a reflection upon the history of the logic, of history of philosophy, especially about what has been thought as a category before. If you look at the second quote, the known thought forms, which are thought forms of the logic of Aristotle or the thinking of Kant, they're a necessary condition for the development in the time of Hegel of this science. but they are not yet arranged in a systematic way. So if you are thinking that there is a logic of Aristotle, the categories that we constantly use, they are not yet bound together by what would be a self-conscious science of thought. Now, that which binds together the various thought forms that are that we can find in the history of philosophy, that will be the Hegelian notion of the concept, which is to be this activity of binding together finite categories, finite elements under one principle. The second point would be what are then thought forms? What are then categories? And in difference, so differently than, for example, contemporary or analytic philosophers, or at least parts of the history of the analytic philosophy, is that Hegel does not believe that philosophy or logic needs a separate language, a formal language, a language of its own. So for him, language itself is that which stores. The language itself is that which stores our thought forms, and thought forms do not exist. Categories do not exist outside of language. And in this sense, it will be a process of abstraction, a process of rendering the content itself of language finite if we try to develop a scientific language for philosophy. So in that sense, logic will always be a logic of natural language, of language that we use on a daily basis or in other sciences. But what we are looking for, what Hegel is looking for in the logic, is to find in that natural language, to find our use of various concepts, a unifying thread that will give us a self-conscious picture of what thinking is. If you have any questions until now, or you want to discuss all right, then I will share screen again, and so distinctions that we have in natural language will be then also the distinctions from where logic departs. If the question will be then what if logic is something that is part of the realm of the physical or the realm of the spiritual, Hegel would say that is that which unites or that which differentiates mind from nature, for example. He would say that if logic is that which makes one truly human, all the distinctions that we use when you think about what human is are indeed notions that are to be founded in the science of logic. Because all our sensing, intuiting, desiring, as it says in quote number 4, are always separated. What differentiates a human being from an animal, for example, is that all this, the sensing, the intuiting, the desiring, are informed by concepts, by thought forms. They're always mediated by what we call categories. So forms of representations, forms of or purposiveness of our actions is mediated by categories, by our employment of concepts. So it's something that brings Hegel very close to philosophers like Wilfrid Sellars, for example. in seeing that there is such a thing as conceptual activity, and there is no such thing as a given that is prepackaged non-conceptually there. So his conception of mind, of language, is not in any sort of sense an externalist one. But what can be, for those of you who are interested in Sellers or Brandon question, is in which sense Hegel falls or does not fall under this idea that categories are themselves given already. In which sense, for example, individual activity does not orient itself as at categories that are already given, already there before him, and uses them as prepackaged. In which way one can say, this will be a question that I hope we will follow, in which way one can say that our employment of categories does not come from our generating of them. If there is indeed a actuality out there that is already pre-structured for an individual consciousness to apprehend. So a further step, and this will be our quote number 6, that our employment of categories is not necessarily conscious. So one of the difference between Hegel and a philosopher of subjectivity is that he does not see the employment of categories as something that necessarily has to be conscious. Activity, conscious activity, depends upon employment of distinctions, the employment of categories that are not, that also direct behavior, direct activity, also when we are not thinking about them. This sense, even when we, phenomena like desire, for example, or phenomena of will, of purposiveness, of orientation towards a goal, are already in conscious life, take the form of a representation, which distinguishes the object that is desired, the object that is wanted, from an immediate apprehension of it. So in this sense, and this is Hegel as being the biggest discovery of Plato, of Aristotle, that every form of behavior has to orient itself towards this notion of ideation, of generating representation that brings an object to the fore. Can you follow me until now, or does it?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, the polemics that this understanding of categories, there has been a polemic to Hegel's time of what is the function of logic, for example, in education. He was also, to the time of the publishing of the first volume, a high school teacher. And all these distinctions I've yet made, that logic is always unconsciously at work in natural language. That there is an autonomy of logic regarding empirical science. That all purposive activity is founded in a generation of representations, in a generation of representation that has a study of the categories behind it. It serves the purpose to distinguish what we could call a conception of logic as ethics, as that which deals with correct thinking, or a concept of logic, let's say, as a physics, which is a theory of thinking as such. So if, to put it more simply, if logic is a form of ethics, there is such a thing as bad thinking. There is such a thing as wrong thinking. If we think about it as a concept of, as a form of physics, there is no such thing as an illogical thought. There's no such thing as bad thinking. Maybe less conscious, less reflected ways of thinking. And what Hegel's then discusses in the introduction, for example, in the preface to the Science of Logic, is in which way this notion of logic as a means brings forth skepticisms. If we do not have, if we put something between a thinking subject or the desiring subject and its object, that which is intended, if we use logic as a sort of tool, that tool, instead of helping one achieve that desired subject, it will just underline the separation, which is also the topic that generates skepticism of the phenomenon of spirit, which we'll talk in a moment. So this is discussion in paragraph 7. That logic, in a certain sense, has to be taught outside of human purposiveness, which sees logic just as some form of regulating behavior, using it as a mapping in social interactions, and so on and so forth. But the notion of logic, in the end, it would be to bring on a manifold of representations and bring them to a concept of unity, to generate the concept that lies before the possibility of engaging in purposive behavior. So it has a priori status in a Kantian sense. The distinction from the Kantian a priori Hegel, I believe, will be a topic that will come up today. A second understanding of logic is to see logic as some sort of medium in which things appear. This is also a distinction that is present in the phenomenon of spirit, that does not see logic as a tool, but that horizon on which we project manifolds. This, I believe, that also in Hegel's eyes is a false understanding of logic, because it presupposes that its truth, the content of categories, is externally given, is that which imprints itself on a background that just forms it, backs it for a human mind. Are there questions at this moment?
I have something akin to a question, though more
Sure.
so a query about how you would navigate Hegel's position on this. And in particular, it's from the phenomenology and philosophy of right, though in the section that you just quoted, in the logic it reappears. There's this discussion of action and intention, and there seems to be a tension inherently, at least in the philosophy of right, between external, or what's called retrospective perspective on action for Hegel, and then internal perspective of agential purpose, intention, what one is intentfully doing. In a moral action, these two, at least according to those like Poolgate, are intention. Ethical action is a coincidence of individuals doing what is prescribed by their situation, and these two are intention. But Brandom and arguably McDowell, but mostly Brandom, he selects passages from different sections of phenomenology in doing this usually, but the approach that he takes is to conceive of Hegel's conception of action as action that's intelligible from two perspectives: the internal perspective of the agent's purpose and action, and the external one administered by others, the right of the objectivity of action. But while arguably philosophy of right, priority is not given to external or retrospective perspection on action, and in moral action, the two remain in tension. For Brandom, he bases that the retrospective view has priority. He does this by, sort of giving priority to particular passages in the phenomenology, I think. But this assumes that, the former sets out Hegel's own views on action, and there's quite a bit of debate between certain Hegelian scholars about this. But this also speaks to sort of normative necessity. I'd just be curious of how you would.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I will engage probably on this distinction between the internal motivation for action and its objectification in the external one. So the two perspectives on action. This is the topic that he discusses in the chapter on reason in the phenomenology of spirit. So there is the phenomenology of spirit, this distinction between what can be understood was, let's say, of an intention on the side of the actant, and to fulfill some sort of commitment. Let's put it in an example. If I want to tell you or ask about, let's say, I tell you that the wall is red, that the wall behind me is red. I presuppose that you will possibly agree, and you also understand what I'm saying. This is the perspective of Brandom, which sees that this internal motivation is not arbitrary, is already informed by the presupposition that I have that you already understand what I intend to do, that my work is intelligible for you, and you hopefully potentially agree with it. Now, for Hegel, the principal thing is that the objectification of my activity is also, in a certain sense, the surpassing of that which I intended to do. For the concept of logic, this distinction is not essential. We can talk about what he means by intentionality, for example, in the logic, and what he understands as intentionality in the phenomenology of spirit. The objectification of my activity, which can then be reconstructed publicly by different speakers, by different observers, negates, in a certain sense, the individual particular interest that led me to pursue that activity. So I do not see in which sense there has to be, from a Hegelian standpoint, an understanding of the internal grounds that leads one to action. This is basically his critique of the categorical imperative of Kantian ethics, which are looking for the sound ground of an activity and do not judge its objectification in practice. If that is the question, if I rightly understood what you were asking me. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like an easy answer, but you know, I think it's something that's of interest to sort of keep these two perspectives in mind moving through.
Okay, I will also want to engage in what Regis said in the chat. That Hegel's understanding on language is considered tone all in the philosophy of spirit. Yes. That distinction between the discussion of language that I see in subjective spirit, in the philosophy of spirit, is one that is put from the perspective of our using language, not of what informs language as, let's say, general intelligibility. The way language is generated, genealogically, how a human being comes to language, the genealogy of it, is not, I believe, the topic of the science of logic. Hegel is interested in the science, in language, in the preface to the science of logic, only to make the 2 points I mentioned. First, that there is no need for special language for logic as he understands it. Also, as that which keeps the whole categorical apparatus that we need to reconstruct logic. This is one of the critique that one can raise against various intentions to formalize Hegel's logic, because that would limit the ambition of the project that he undertakes in the logic, which is to reconstruct a picture of thoughts activity as such, which implicates also the use of natural language, the understanding of purposive behavior, and the public character of our representations, that we can talk about our presentation, our experience. If that makes sense for Regis, I hope.
The problem actually
Sure.
was because this preface he wrote just before he died, and he was thinking of reviewing all of science of logic, but he had time only to review doctrine of being, but he planned to review all of the science of logic. And it seems there's some second literature. I read Michael Forster on Hegel on language, and for him it seems Hegel on this, in the end of his life, in this period, language for him gains a centrality, a fundamental role it hadn't before. So maybe I think he says in the period of phenomenology, yes, but during phenomenology and the end of his life, language is not a central problem for Hegel. But in the end, when he writes this preface, language regains a fundamental role for logic, not only because in the philosophy of spirit, Hegel says that there isn't thinking besides language, outside language, or something like that. And here he gives a more emphatically accent on this, and the logical is something in language. And for me, there is this problem with the relation between the relation of language and thought in Hegel's development of thought. I don't know what you think about it.
Yes, I never thought that Hegel ever envisioned what can one qualify as thinking in a narrow sense as being something that can exist outside of language. This, if you want to have a bigger arc, at the moment when Hegel rejects intellectual intuition, or intuition as a carrier of truth, it's the moment where anything else than conceptual, anything else than discursive, does not for him qualify as knowledge. One can, I believe, make this more tenuous argument and saying that there is thought outside of language, but there is no knowledge outside of it. So in a certain sense, I believe one can make this argument that language using is not necessarily conscious. It's not necessarily a transparent carrier of what one wants to do with it. But at the same time is always the only environment where one can distribute and generate knowledge. It's the same. So I think the distinction between thinking and language is that while one cannot say that language itself thinks, as Jacobi or Heidegger would say, but the distinction is between knowledge and other forms of unconscious thought, if one wants to use that word in Hegel, I believe. All this results from rejection of intellectual intuition as an immediate form of knowledge, of foundation, which is his critique of Fichte and this strand of post-Kantian thought, or Fichte or Schelling, who have a role for intellectual intuition as being that which found ground science. Just a final point. I think indeed that for Hegel, at the end of his life, he wrote this second preface, which is now the quotes on my. The second preface, the text which should have been a second edition of the Phenomenology of Spirit, which is the text that begins the encyclopedia, the four Stellungen, for positions of thought towards objectivity, and the second preface to the Science of Logic. They are both concerned with what Hegel thought as being very uncharitable readings of his work, where I think he actually asks us the question of, I am being misunderstood. People are reading the beginning of the Logic in ways I have never intended. So maybe the problem lies in the way logic behaves to natural language. The natural language carries also representations that are not adequate to what the science of logic intends to describe. Was it helpful, Regis? You are muted.
That when Hegel says that logic is the movement of the Sache selbst, some people read it as an objective thing, and logic as something not reduced to language, but I totally agree with you. So it's not actually a question. I'm just reiterating that I agree with you. Language has a fundamental role, and once he rejects the intellectual intuition, thinking and thought are intrinsic one to another. And okay, that's it.
Thank you. So to stay on this topic, quicker is to see that departure from a notion of intellectual intuition as being that which should give foundation to science. So intellectual intuition, to just explain this, what it is the understanding that there is such a thing as a form, a specific form of intuitions of immediate relation to world or to objectivity, that is some sort of primary evidence for that there is both a subject and the object, and the unification of the subject and the object of thought. This would be something which is not given discursively, but is the, let's say, the Cartesian foundation, the substance that gives us the ground of all which should be called then science. So if you want to resort to intellectual intuition, that the movement of science will just be there to unfold what is kept in this immediate evidence that there is a world, that there is a subject, that there are things. So the task of philosophy, according to Victor, is to unfold what is already implicit in that form of intuition. The problem then that Hegel has is that he does not want a concept of the absolute that one just has, that is already given, but then to understand that absolute, that unity between object and the subject, that immediate ground of knowledge, one has to reconstruct it otherwise. By not having access to intellectual intuition, which means saying that world is not immediately transparent, one has to construct all these notions and see them as a result, because otherwise one will recur to a presupposition of this absolute. So, and then that makes the problem of beginning science, of finding ultimate ground for reality, something very difficult, because the beginning becomes very problematic. By rejecting the immediate knowledge of the world, the given, one has to start somewhere without incurring a presupposition that would function as in the same way as intellectual intuition. But when you reject this understanding of the given, of this primary unity of this ground, one has always access to finite determinations. So Hegel said that infinite then is not given. The activity of thought itself is not self-transparent, in order then to be unfolded in a discursive manner. So what he then does is to find a starting point that should not be a starting point. But when he talks about language in this preface, is that the readers that looked at the logic is to think that the beginning is either contingent. So Hegel should not have started with pure being, as we will see, but it doesn't matter with what one starts. One cannot start with something that is without presuppositions. One cannot start with a certain definite representation or a form of evidence. So in the end, when Hegel tries to find that which does not have presuppositions, he just finds some abstract concept of being that cannot provide that kind of fundamental ground from which one is to unfold, because we will see, it lacks in any sort of determination. Now, to move a bit quicker is then to indeed look at why Hegel starts with pure being, if it should be the beginning of the logic. To give my thesis on this is that it's not the the ground of science cannot be without presuppositions, which Hegel knows. I think it's best is to look at this as saying, that's why I call the first session before finitude, is to see in Hegel the author who understands that if we don't have an infinite given, that reason is given to us, and we just have to unfold it, is that every finite thing that we encounter in our representation already has some form of presupposition. In this sense, I believe the beginning of the logic is to be read as some sort of riddle. A riddle that will say that the definite something, a determinate something, a finite thing or a finite thought, already is a result of conceptual usage. That there are concepts that already regulates already regulate what we define as a finite thing. Okay. I will. Okay, I will answer them to.
Sorry. Can I just ask?
Sure.
It's maybe a bit of a naive sort of question, but why, in your mind, then does Hegel begin with this abstract or supposedly abstract concept of being? Why
Sure.
is this the starting point?
Yes. Thank you. Okay. I'll answer this directly. So, if we are to think, for example, of an object in general as being a determined something, all which is in our representation, which is always finite, are finite objects of thought, be it books, be it ideas of mathematical objects, of scientific objects. They're all in a certain sense finite, which is then to say that they will always relate to an other. So if we are to understand that this that nothing finite can be a starting point because it always includes relations to other, imply analogies, imply definitions. One has to find a ground that does not relate to something. So in a certain sense, the abstraction of pure being is to say that we do not have that sort of beginning that just is able to unfold itself. The pure being is let's say a characterization of a lack of determination, and then to show that determination itself it's something that should arise out of some form of determinacy. So pure being, which Hegel says it's just nothingness. It's if you use words like pure being, you actually talk about absolutely nothing, and then to see that exactly this movement from being to nothing, so pure being nothing at all, while at that which the thought refers to, nothing happens, but you have two words for it. You have both being and nothing. So you have the notion of distinction. And this is the concept of becoming. If one, I usually also gave this example in the introductory video, if every phenomena is finite also that it ceases to be or that comes to be, something starts somewhere and ends somewhere, be it in time or be it in space or be it the neighboring concept. It's its limits, its limitation should be seen as this relation between being and nothing, being something that at the beginning is indeterminate. So the point is that one should not start with a definite representation of what one is thinking, but with that which representation implies. It implies the notion that is a result, that a determinate something, an object, is a result of this sort of interplay between being and nothing. So if you are interested in, I think someone here was interested in process, in notions of process and philosophy, process philosophy. Hegel would say that one cannot directly think processes. That every sort of thought being representational will have to objectify a process. And this objectification of a process implies that a becoming takes the form of a contradictory relation between continuity and difference, for example, between identity and difference. So while you do not have this notion of becoming as some sort of temporal or spatial process, a logical notion that a becoming is always a form of contradiction between identity and difference, or being or nothing, or yes, continuity and discontinuity. Is this helpful?
Well, yes. I guess sort of what I wonder is sort of, would Hegel say that beginning with being and the sort of tension and the dialectics between the being and nothing, is that a necessary starting point, or is it something he chooses out of sort of sheer desperation or not being able to start anywhere else, and sort of as a riddle, as you say, or is it a strategic move, or sort of is it?
I believe that it is a strategic move, because he finds, so he tries to criticize more aspects. One of them is to show that everything has a presupposition. The second thing is to move the beginning of science from the realm of representation, because so that you don't start with a definition, for example, you don't start with a particular representation of something, and third, and which I believe for him is the most important, by negating the beginning of science in representation, one has to negate the beginning of science in a conception of the self, as that to ground science in the thinking eye. As he also, I believe, in a certain sense to be discussed, he acknowledges a certain form of autonomy of categories of thought forms from the individual thinker. The problem that, for example, Kant has or Fichte has is I constantly relate to this notion of subjectivity, be it through, in the case of Fichte, as an intellectual intuition, or as that which has spontaneity and creates phenomenal world by applying categories on sense data, on intuitions. For Hegel, he arises at two problems. The first one is that it's, as he sometimes polemically asks the question, it's hard to find the exact border between the transcendental subjectivity, so thinking in general, and the empirical eye. And he suspects that we have this, we understand this subjectivity also as a form of analogy of the empirical eye. And the second one is it's about the universality that's in the categories themselves. He puts our categorical apparatus that when I think about myself, because I always use language, I use various thought forms like unity, a notion of unity. I use a notion of difference. I use notions of quality or quantity, for example, even when I think about myself. It's in a certain way, it's, Hegel would say that just as I am under the power of my desires, under the power of my purposes, under the power of my social environment, I am also under the power of the categories that I use them to create the representations that make me function in the world. So it would be difficult for Hegel to assume that I am the master of the categorical apparatus that I am employing. Even when I think about myself, it's in a way to say that Hegel does not believe that we are self-transparent, that we can have a privileged access to ourselves. Was that helpful?
Yeah, for me at least. Thank you.
Okay. I will then try to focus then on to go a bit further on this thought about pure being. That the problem that I believe that Hegel has with the beginning of logic is that most of the categories that he has to use to describe the beginning will be also categories that will have to be later developed in the logic, like the notion of reflection, the notion of unity, for example. So in this sense, I believe that also the science of logic has an unfolding beginning, that this riddle of being, nothing, and becoming will constantly receive further balances, further determinations down the road. Thus, we will return, for example, at the notion of becoming and being at the beginning of the logic of essence, as well as in the logic of concept in the end. The biggest problem that I believe he has is the notion of representation. That people and authors, or even later, even I think authors like Marx, still want to see in pure being, to connect pure being with the notion of representation. If the function of that pure being is exactly to negate the presentation, its possible representation. In the order of representation, Hegel would say that being and nothing have to be completely different, to be qualitatively different, that being just is and nothing is not, for example, or understanding nothing as not the opposite term of being, but of something, or seeing becoming as a notion of transition, for example. In this sense, the status of representation in logic, I think it's quite difficult, as I do not think that one of the points of the science of logic is that pure thought, because it concerns only with itself, does not give space for representation. Representation is a topic that he discusses at length, for example, in the phenomenology of spirit, but not in the logic. This is also an open question for me if the relation of thought with itself, with its own thought determination, take forms of representation, for example. Now, I would like to look at the passage about the role of the I, for example, of what we just thought. Are there other questions until then? All right. So in the introductory chapter, the one which is concerned with what science has to begin. He discusses beginning with the I, the Cartesian way in the beginning of philosophy. That the I would be so the subjectivity will be a privileged place to start reconstructing the system of science, because it's something which everybody is acquainted with. And this has the form of certainty. Just to give a bit of background, Hegel distinguishes between truth and its form. Certainty is the form of truth, the way we experience truth, for example, the form of evidence. Contrary to a phenomenology in, let's say, contemporary understanding of Husserl or Heidegger, truth is not identical with an experience of certainty, for example. All this, one can see that, one can think that the phenomenology of spirit is this quest to unify truth with certainty. Of course, so truth with its form. And he understands experience, conscious experience, between those ends, one being certainty, the other one being truth. To evade skepticism, one can define epistemologically for Hegel is the distance when truth and certainty do not coincide with each other. So as long there is a distinction between truth and certainty, there is also always the possibility then one can raise skeptic claims about knowledge. The problem that Hegel would see that which arises from this idea of intellectual intuition, which is self-certain truth, fundamental ground, is that one has to reconstruct the theory of human or of conscious experience that brings certainty to truth and the other way around. Otherwise, one cannot think in a systematic way. The problem that what makes this even hard is that he does not believe that the individual I has the resources to be self-certain. He said, for example, in the passage 33 there, that the I could function, for example, as a ground for science, as long as it has this immediate certainty, that it has this self-transparency, which it could be possible that I have some private access to myself, but I cannot transform the acquaintance that I have with myself in discourse, in public discourse. So you will need to have go in this process of abstraction to generate that which the Kantians will call transcendental I, by a process of abstraction of excising from the I all its particular content. and in the process of abstraction, of course, the I can no longer be that ground because they will no longer be immediate. It will be a result of a process of reflection, result of a process of abstraction, which is already activity of thought. So then we have the problem that we are at the end of a process of reflection, of process of abstraction that has not been accounted for. Are at this moment further questions?
Could I ask
Sure.
a clarification question on this? Just when we have this gap between certainty and truth, what type of truth are we talking about? Is it the idea of something that's kind of necessary and it's kind of articulable in a public discourse? Because certainty, as I'm understanding it, means you have something given kind of, as it were, before your eyes, and you can sort of see what's there and kind of prod it and look at it, but there might be not any necessity. There could be no logical necessity. So is that the kind of gap that you're talking about between certainty and truth?
Yes, there is. So there are two, let's say, framings of the question of certainty. The first one is at the beginning of the phenomenology, where Hegel talks about sense certainty. The problem that he sees there, the sort of immediate access to sense data, if an access, an immediacy that I'm certain of, I can be certain that I see birds, tables, other human beings. The problem is when I try to translate this in discourse, for example, the problem of trying to fixate my experience in language, for example. So that's the moment when for Hegel certainty disappears. The moment when I try to actually conceptualize or recapitulate what I encountered. Now, in that and that will be the motor, the engine of the phenomenology of spirit, where we start with the maximal distance between certainty, what I take to be truth, and what at the end, after conceptually proofreading what I took to be true, disappears. And this kind of constant process of conceptual revision of what I take to be true, be it sense certainty, or more developed stages of conceptual accumulation, is that I always start with this presupposition of certainty. We have then a secondary process of conceptual proofreading, which would show that what I took to be true needs revision. And then you have this movement in the phenomenology of spirit of constant revision of moments of figures of taking something for granted. Now the problem, which includes, so the concept of the I itself, or the concept of the possibility of having a ground for laws, for example, which is the difference between, let's say, individual self-consciousness and what Hegel calls reason or spirit. The problem in the logic, the problem with this in the logic is that it has to presuppose that when we have a concept of science, truth and certainty have been already united. So what, in a most general way, what Hegel calls science is this unity between, this identity between truth and certainty. This is the, what he will define as the necessity of a concept of science. So that necessity that science implies, the difference between knowledge and scientific knowledge, is exactly this notion of necessity. Knowledge being always finite or able to be individualized, it may contain and always contain some sort of gap between truth and certainty. The notion of science cannot. That's its necessity. And that the quest for the beginning of the logic is the quest for finding a way to both satisfy the requirements of science, of uniting truth and certainty, and not falling in some sort of trap of self-transparency, of presupposing that there is such thing as self-transparency or transparency of some sort of ground. So these are the Scylla and Charybda in which Hegel has to move.
Thanks.
All right. Now, what the problem, so the problem that he has with this concept of being and nothing is that it has to need some sort of, I believe, proof, which is if you look at this at the various remarks at the chapters, there are four of them. He will have to show that before moving on to a concept of determination, for example, proof between different, as if one argues against Hegel that between being and nothing, there has to be some sort of difference. They are not identical, they are not the same. Or that there is no possibility of transitioning from being a nothing to a something. Hegel has a very weird way of going about this in saying that the only proof that one can have of being as a legitimate ground is that any form of proof is impossible. So it's in the end a sort of absence of evidence, which makes the beginning with being legitimate. Because if such a notion of pure being, of immediacy, would be able to be shown as having some sort of content that can be proven, something that can be representationally instantiated, it will not be immediate. It will relate to another of being, to another of the nothingness. So every time we try to think about notes like pure being or nothingness, one has to recur to representation, which would transform them in finite things. But because it's no other way of thinking about being and nothing than just by instantiating in some sort of representation is a proof that every form of representation has a presupposition that can be linked to notions of being and nothing, or notions of immediacy. So I would like now, are there other questions relating to this? Okay, so the unity of being and nothing, it's called by Hegel becoming, but it's not to the first argument against this sameness of being and nothing being called becoming would have to be that one uses notions like unity, for example, notions that where does this notion come from? And again, Hegel resorts to an argument about language. If we look at the passage number 42, and where he's talking about judgment, for example, Hegel would say later that all finite things are judgment. A judgment, so that you ascribe a predicate to a subject, always presupposes, referring of the intention of the judgment, that the predicate says something and finds a sameness in the subject. He says there that judgments join subject and object in a connection of identity, quote. Abstraction is therefore made from the fact that the subject has yet more determinacies than the predicate has, just as the predicate is wider than the subject. Now, if the content is speculative, the non-identity of subject and predicate is also an essential moment. But this is not expressed in judgment. The paradoxical and even bizarre light in which much of recent philosophy is cast for those not intimate with speculative thought is due in many ways to the form of the simple judgment when used to convey speculative results. This is a dig in two directions. First, coming back to the notion of language, which we discussed with Regis, is that there is a difficulty of natural language in coming to terms with content that is not representational. There is this intransparency in natural language in dealing with contents that are not that are either too immediate or too far or infinite, or that are not representational in nature. And in this sense, the form of judgment is inadequate for Hegel to discuss topics like being and nothing, which also makes being and nothing not categories. They're not categories in a narrower sense. Now the problem is that this notion of judgment is not being applicable to the unity or the sameness of being and nothing. It's a further proof that these are presuppositionless characterizations. The other problem with it is that there exists then something which, in a certain sense, what he calls the speculative, that is not the form of content that is not limitable to the form of judgment. And this speculative is what Hegel will call thought itself, that is not self-transparent enough in order to be grasped completely in a form of judgment. Because judgment is an infinite, it's a finite form. It only can be applied to finite object, as Kant also tells us. So in the end, thought itself, the activity of thought itself, it's not transparent to its own, let's say, finite means. This is what, and this finite means of thought is what Hegel calls the understanding. But if we say this, we have a further problem. We will have to acknowledge that there has to be something ineffable out there, something that cannot be grasped conceptually, which is also the alternative that Hegel does not want, that will imply an absolute which is theological, an absolute which cannot be grasped by thinking itself. So there has to be this content, which will be the topic of the logical, which is the notion of the absolute, that cannot be directly grasped in judgments because it's not a finite object, On the other side, it cannot be shown as being ineffable, as being God. There is, of course, a theological reading of Hegel, which implies that that absolute is indeed, in a certain sense, ineffable, so cannot be reduced to judgment. But I don't hold this correctly, and I think that it is something which we'll discuss, I think, in the third session when we discuss about the notion of the absolute. We keep this in mind that we have this tension between judgment and a speculative content, or what Hegel calls speculative content. Do we have a question on this?
Andrei?
Yes.
I just wanted to remind you that in 50 minutes, 2 hours are over, so you have the 10 minutes for discussion, and then the 20 minutes for the assignments.
Okay.
Just a reminder.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Yes. Good. Okay, I will try to sum this up in 10 minutes. So the question we had is about the beginning of science. What is the foundation of science? It cannot be an immediate notion. It has to be discursive, so that which structures natural language. And it has to be an immediacy that is not a given. So it has to start with a simple characterization of what we can call immediacy. Now that, for Hegel, is a pure being. I talked about why it cannot be the I, why it cannot be external to activity of thought. And we also discussed why this conception of logic is both it's an autonomous activity of thinking with itself. Why logic is not means, it's not an instrument that one uses, it's not an ethics, it's a physics, it's about thinking as such, it's about what is conceptual thinking. And it's also, we discussed at the beginning, cannot be representational. Now, in this sense, we have at the end a notion of being which is pure abstract and does not imply meaning, as, for example, an existentialist would say that being is directly interlinked or directly connected to notions of meaning. So we just have at the beginning of the logic concept of pure abstraction, which is the only concept of pure being, which we know it's abstract, but we don't know yet how it comes, how abstraction itself is generated. This will be discussed in the logic of essence, which will be the topic, will be the next topic, where we also discuss why there is such a thing as a logic of being and a logic of essence. We'll discuss the topic when we think about the transition itself. We had, because we don't have today 2.5 hours, we cannot look at the Adorno text on Heidegger, but anyways, for next week, I planned the notion of ontological difference, and we can look at that text then. The problem that I still we should discuss is to give a preview how we come from here to what we'll discuss next week. So because we had this we started with the notion of pure being, Hegel then develops from it the concept of this unity of being and nothing, which will be called then becoming. The problem of becoming, as we said, is being this sort of sameness of being and nothingness that it's constantly cannot be fixed. I told that the fixation of the notion of becoming will always imply a tension between continuity and difference, between identity and difference, between being nothing and this, has in a certain sense, thinking needs it to break it down in various one-sided versions of one-sidedness, which will be the first will be the concept of something, which is a being with just one negation, one determination, which will be then developed in this sort of constant one-sidednesses. So you'll have a being with a negation. You'll have then the negation of the determination of being, which will then develop in the one and the other, for example. And then this will lead us to various unfolding of categories of what is finite and infinite, in which sense a finite is never real from the standpoint of infinite. And so on. So the finite is inexistent for the notion of the infinity. The notion of the infinity is inexistent for the notion of the finite, and so on and so forth. So the problem that results in the whole notion of being is this kind of one-sided sublation of the notion of becoming. Either you take being as the meaning of the entire unity of being and nothingness, or you take nothingness as the entire unity of becoming. If we take it as nothingness, it's what Hegel will call essence. If we take it as nothing, if you take it as being, that which defines what the unity of being and becoming is, it will be the logic of being. And they all have their own unfolding of categories. I think I will begin next week giving exactly a review of how the categories of being are generated from this definition of becoming as something fixed, as the one-sidedness of becoming, in the sense of being. If are there questions on this? Okay, then I want to discuss how should we then proceed. For the next week, we have the becoming of essence, which we just start from this notion of becoming again. And we will try to look more, because we have 2.5 hours next time, to look more on text that will concretize all this very abstract talk that we had today. I was just trying to give an introduction that will concretize why and how other authors in the history of philosophy use this whole talk about immediacy or being in other context. For today, we had the idea that we should look at Adorno's critique of Heidegger, where we see how all this Hegelian apparatus frames the question in existentialism, for example. So this in link between being and meaning. And I thought for next week to also look at, it was also in the readings and the text from Heidegger on the ontological difference, and to look at that after we discuss the Hegelian topics. I am curious, what would you, so from your interest, what would be your, what would you like to read, for example, for a third and fourth session? I have my preferences, but depending also on your personal interest, or what would you like to have as besides Hegel as a reading topic?
I mean, I personally think it would be nice, and I know it's difficult to situate this, to have some Brandon and or McDowell. I saw that you mentioned Meyasu in,
Yes.
but I
Yes.
don't see a reading by, but also it'd be nice to, I think, have Meyasu, because, you know, I mean, like Carl Sachs and other people who bring Meyasu into this, you know, pure contingency into discussions regarding the given, and I think, you know, it's a good way to situate contemporary discourse around this.
I personally, yes, I intended for the handout for next week to bring Quine and Sellers from the analytic traditions, because they're both, I thought about very short texts. The one is about ideology and ontology, for example. And I thought about Meyasu to discuss it when we talk about contradiction. If we reach that far next week, I will upload and print out the handout some text of Meyasu.
And
I saw that. Sorry, I saw that you had Postone there as well. It's
Yes.
I at least am interested in Postone's work. I don't know if for the rest of the people it would be an interesting discussion, but I'm reading like Time and Social Domination right now.
Yes,
so
great book.
It would be really good.
Yes, I wrote in the syllabus that in the last session, depending on your interest and how what would be your topics of interest, we can choose in the last session, because there's only 20 pages of primary reading in the last session. If you want to have a discussion of Marxism, for example, how do they use Hegel? I've thought of Postone, which I believe is the closest of the Marxists to Hegel. Yes, we could do Postone if the other people are also for that.
As long as it's not Harman.
And I actually because I wanted to, but that will be I believe that the point of the notion of the concept is to discuss three things from Harman. One of them is about the unity of consciousness, and then his understanding of contradiction and ground. There are, but I see we also already have 3 votes for Postone, so.
Andrei, just a small question. Pippin, do you think could go with probably the 3rd or 4th? I don't know. What do you think about Pippin?
Yes.
As an interpreter of Hegel.
If in the folder with the readings, I usually chose for every session a commentary. I use Holgate will be great, like for the beginning of logic, and I put I guess the classic one like Longinus. I put the classic ones, which are my favorites. I put Longinus and Burbage as commentaries in your reading if they can be very, very helpful.
Beatrice?
Yes, Beatrice.
Ah, she's my professor.
Ah, lucky man. Yes, Pippin would be interesting if you want to frame the discussion in the 3rd session. Also second about contradiction and actuality. I think that will be a worthy adversary or a great friend, I guess. I thought exactly in what I called in the introduction as being the domestication of Hegel. In the case of Pippin, would be interesting to see how he reads that the rational is the actual and the actual is the rational. Analytic philosophers like Pippin or Brandon, so the Anglo-American reception of Hegel, try to make that reasonable in a sense that the actual is rational is to be understood as this kind of minimal requirement that has to be there in order for actuality to be conceptualized. So what Hegel says is that the actual has to be, in a certain sense, thinkable, and that this is all what this sentence would mean in the philosophy of right. That we have to presuppose for the particular science, which is the science of the law, science of right, a certain intelligibility of actuality. I believe in, but Marxist authors or the more left-wing authors, they see in this some sort of divine providence. They see theology, they see purposiveness, the Whiggish understanding of history that David mentioned, or some sort of legitimatory discourse from the side of Hegel, that things are as they should be, for example. If we look at, for example, I think that the discussion that the Pippin frames it, I believe it to be both worthy of discussion, and I personally think it's wrong, but I think this sentence comes always as a topic on Hegel, the relation between actuality and rationality, and we can look at Pippin's interpretation of that.
Are these all upload? Maybe it's just my Google Classroom. Are some of these still going to be uploaded? Like the Longinus and so on? Because I only see the Adornos and then the logic.
I sent them, but if they are not already there, okay.
You sent them via email, or you?
No, I sent them to the organizers.
Okay, maybe they're still going to be uploaded. I don't know if other students can see them or not.
But I will, to have access to the classroom, I will upload them all. Also postone, and I chose a couple of texts of Sellers, if Akin is interested in that, that direction.
For the third section, Andrei, for the third session, I thought maybe we could discuss also Meyasu at this point, the notion of hyperchaos and contingency in Meyasu and modality regarding Hegel, and maybe Sellers also, his account of modalities and ontological status of modalities. And there's also maybe a polemical author I would like to discuss, maybe Zizek's comprehension of the doctrine of essence, in with the negative. It has a
beautiful book,
an exclusive chapter on doctrine of essence, and but maybe for the second session, contradiction, and he also discusses contingency in less than nothing. I think it's very interesting, and I don't know what you think about it.
In my plan, Meyasu would come mostly in the second session, as being an author that denies, so that says that facticity and contingency depend on the principle of non-contradiction as functioning. So for him, if A and non-A can both be true at the same time, nothing can happen. So you have a continuity, you have contingency and let's say history through time by the fact that the principle of non-contradiction is true. Now, obviously, it will be a great topic when we discuss about contradiction in Hegel, and how Meyasu understands non-contradiction, how Hegel understands non-contradiction or contradiction. And I thought that would be interesting.
Andrei, also intervene for a second.
Sure.
First of all, out of my question, I really agree with discussing postone, also Zizek, that would be really great. So I vote for your options. But I want to ask you something, because in the chat also the other colleagues mentioned Holgate. Even though Holgate has this beautiful book, The Opening of Hegel's Logic. So he discussed mostly being. I think for the logic of essence, we can also make use of a great argument of Holgate. And that I think maybe we should be fruitful in the idea that if you think about so different authors like Gadamer or Deleuze or Heidegger, they all say basically that the Hegelian system always presupposes what it cannot think. And maybe we can go on the process of reflection on logic of essence to see exactly what you mentioned today, because I really find it intriguing what you said, and really great stuff you said, that it's quite the opposite with the presupposition. It does not presuppose. Instead, Hegel tries to see why exactly do we have this mechanism of presupposing? Why does thought goes to presupposing and conditioning and all the apparatus from the logic of essence? And maybe if you can recommend us something regarding this topic, because I think our next seminar will be we will be discussing about this topic of the reflection and presupposing.
Personally, the best one of the best texts on the logic of essence on reflection is a book of Franco Cirulli, is his name. Hegel's Critique of Essence.
Andrei?
Yes.
You had a robot voice for the last few seconds. Could you repeat what you just said?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
On the topic of reflection.
Okay, it's the same again. Your connection seems to be a little bit unstable right now.
Okay.
It's actually not unstable for me. I'm hearing.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, this is just me.
No, it's okay. The quality is okay. Hearing very well.
Okay, so then maybe it's just me. Sorry.
Yes. My favorite book on the topic of reflection is the one of Franco Cirulli. It's his name, Hegel's Critique of Essence.
Okay, we'll browse that book for the next seminar.
I will upload. Yes. It will be uploaded. Very good. All right. Okay. So just to pick the notes. So you decided on postpone for the last session, or? Hello?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to do this democratically because some people are, but
Hey, is anybody against doing postpone? Let's do it the opposite.
Right. And it was there Meyasu and Sellers and okay.
Yes. All of that. Yes. Enthusiastic.
Okay. Taking notes. All right. Then what are we the time? Okay. So I guess Eric, it's.
So we assign now the presentations and see who is already up for what. Okay. Can you maybe share your screen or maybe I can do that the same. It's also fine. I'll do that right now. Here we have it. Can everybody see the reading syllabus? Okay, cool. Okay, so okay, we have postpone for the 4th session, and I think what we should minimally do is the presentations and respondents for the 1st session. And please
Wait, where's the
remember.
4th session on that document? I only see 3.
Yeah, I also. Does anybody else have a document
No,
with
I see.
4?
I see 4. Yeah.
I mean, I see 4, but I don't see like.
There's only the primary reading.
Ah, okay.
Because
It's not underlined. Okay.
No. Sorry for
Okay.
that.
Okay. Yeah. So please remember that next week we are going to have spring break. So next week there will not be a session. So you have 2 weeks to read and to prepare. So does anybody automatically say, okay, I want to do the second session presentation?
The second one that's not Meisu and Sellars, right?
If you want to discuss sellers, I guess we can put sellers in the second session. I thought about Quine, but we can discuss sellers instead of Quine.
I mean, I like that Quine too, and I think they're related, so I could put them into conversation with one another and present on both Quine and Sellars.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can do Heidegger if you want to.
Great.
Okay, so Eken and Carl both do presentations next week.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anybody who wants to respond to you two?
I can respond to
I think
any of them. Maybe Heidegger.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so Eric, if I can respond to Eken,
yeah,
if that's possible.
I write it down. And Reggie on Carl, who is doing on Heidegger.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we have 2 presenters, 2 respondents. Anybody else? I mean, two are minimum, but if anybody else wants to do, it's totally fine.
So perhaps on sellers and the logic of essence.
Okay, but do we do this next? Andrei, do we do this next sellers and the logic of essence next week or in the 3rd session? Because I don't see sellers on the readings.
I put Quine instead of sellers, but sellers. If the people were more interested in sellers. Yes, if Stefan wants to do, but how long will be the presentations? How long do they have to take?
Normally they are around about 10 minutes, and the respondents write 5 minutes or so, roughly.
Then logic of essence is next week. So if we have 3 presentations, 10 minutes each, respond.
Wait, so next week, 2 people are presenting on sellers. I'm presenting on sellers, and okay.
You could also do
that. Are going to be 2 different readings of sellers, or are we going to? Because that seems redundant.
We can discuss which one of the what text takes. We can take different texts for sellers.
Okay.
Okay, so Stefan, you also in session number 2, also on sellers.
Yes.
Okay, I'll write it down. Okay, so I'll propose. Okay, we still have time. Is anybody already up to present to know? Okay, I want to present in session 3.
I want to present in session 3.
Okay.
Same here, Eric.
Yes. Let me write it down.
In which session we will discuss postone?
In the
final session.
I think I will go on that one, if it's okay for you.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else, either for the third or for the fourth session? Remember that everybody okay, I see chat has something. The problem is somehow I cannot access the chat at the moment because I'm screening my, I'm sharing my screen.
Raphael told us that he wants to respond to Postone.
Yeah, I can either present or respond to Postone, it's fine.
Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna note you down as respondent. Do you know, Raphael, maybe do you already know when you want to present?
It could be on the 4th, like what are the options? Yeah, on the last one would be good for me.
Yeah, Andrei, we are doing, in 4th, we are doing Postone and just a little bit of these 20 pages of reading.
Yes, they are not little.
Okay, yeah, but yeah. Raphael, do you want to do then for the primary reading, the presentation?
I'm not sure if I could actually do that, but I can try. I don't know.
Okay, we can. The book of Postone is enormous, so we can take.
Yeah, I think
2 topics in that.
Maybe I know, didn't we in the reading, Raphael, in the reading group we have that someone posted an interview with Postone which basically summarizes the book. Or I know that there is an article out there which basically summarizes time, labor, and social domination. Maybe that would be a good alternative to read. I don't know, maybe there are also selected chapters which are.
There are also other articles by Postone. There is one, I think, that he lays out his relationship with Hegel and Lukács. Like there, we could take one. I could take one of those, something about Postone, but then related.
Let's say let's propose the following. Hegel's concept of spirit is close to what Postone would call value, for example. The Hegel concept of the concept is what Postone would call value. One presentation on value and the concept, and the other one the critique of Lukács, for example, of what Postone calls traditional Marxism.
Yeah, I can make the critique, like I would be familiar with it. The Lukács part and so on.
And then we can break this into, and maybe Victor, if you want to do it on the notion of value, the notion of spirit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there anybody who already knows, okay, I want to respond to Raphael. Maybe who has not, because you need to do one presentation and one, okay, it's a little bit, we have just 4 sessions, so it's gonna be difficult, but I think it's normally, okay, you have at least one presentation and one response if you want to get the credit points for this seminar. So please keep that in mind. We can still, in the following weeks, fill in the remaining slots for presentations and respondents, but yeah. So nobody yet for Raphael as respondent?
I think maybe it's a good idea to just, if you're right with it, sort of just keep a mind on it before each week and sort of fill it in as we go, perhaps, because you know, personally I'm not acquainted with these readings at all, so I would sort of have to, you know.
Okay, yeah, I just want to get as much slots filled as possible in the first, because otherwise it's just a total mess to get. It's very chaotic then. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the people we have so far. So in the second session coming up, not next week, but in the following week, we have Ekin and Carl as presenters. Ekin, you wanted to, and we have Federico is respondent to Ekin, and Regi is respondent to Carl. and also Stefan presents. And Stefan and Ecken both present on sellers, and Karl presents on the Heidegger text.
I will also present on Quine.
Okay, oh, you do sellers
Like
and
I put
Quine?
Seller and Quine in conversation because obviously Quine influences sellers.
Okay. Good. Then Stefan, you only do sellers.
Yes.
Okay.
I can present Meyasu actually, but
Okay.
shall we have Meyasu?
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrei,
maybe.
in which session did we want to read Meyasu?
Oh, I can't. Oh.
Let's put the third one.
In the third one, okay?
Yes.
So Evrim, do you?
Can I respond to Meyasu?
Yeah, give me some time to note. So Evrim, you present on Meyasu, third session.
Yes.
Okay, and Ekin, you respond to that.
Great.
Okay.
But what are the other texts for the third section now?
So for the third session we have wait, give me a minute. For the third session we only have Meyasu so far.
Yes.
Okay.
What is the text for Meyasu?
Beyond finitude.
Okay.
No, after finitude. It's called after finitude.
Yeah.
We'll upload.
There's the book from John Burbage on contingency also, maybe.
Yes, I sent that in the folder with the readings. It's there. Also, it's both the Meyasu one and the Burbage one. They are both in the folder I sent.
Oh, good. I can take Burbage, yeah, on the third session.
Okay. Burbage. Okay. Okay, and Federico, you also want to present in the third session. Which text was that on? Federico? I can't hear you at the moment. Maybe you can text it and write it down in chat, and someone can read it. Because Federico's internet connection is pretty unstable. Did he text something in the chat?
Yeah, he said he couldn't hear about the readings. You want me to ask what would he present on session 3?
Yes, please. That would be awesome. I don't know why I can't access the chat at the moment. But maybe I can stop sharing my screen because I mean yeah. Federico?
Eric, so I heard that for the third session you were having Meyasu. I didn't get the rest.
Yeah, a Burbage text or Burgage? What was his name? That wasn't uploaded yet. That
John Burbage.
Yeah. Who?
John Burbage.
Burbage. Okay. Yeah. So this isn't uploaded yet.
I'm assuming the logic of Hegel's logic and introduction.
Okay. And Federico, which text would you like to present on in the third session?
Well, if I heard that they already chose Burbage, I can present on the Hegel text if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, finding presenters for the Hegel text is the most difficult part. Okay.
Gonna die, but
I mean, we're here to learn. We are not experts yet, so yeah. Okay. So yeah, no problem. Does anyone already know that she or he wants to present or to respond to Federico's presentation on the Hegel text?
Aliaski says they would like to on the chat. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name.
Yeah.
Alex.
Oh yeah. Okay. Alexei. Yeah.
Alexa.
Yeah. No. Yeah. To respond to Regis.
Yeah. Wait.
Yeah.
Okay, and can't respond to Regis. Okay.
No. Wait.
Wait.
No.
Yeah.
So no,
What?
Aliaxe wrote that he wanted to respond to Regis and not.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean.
And maybe is it okay if I stop sharing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because I mean we all have the readings, and then I can finally access the chat again. Okay. And yeah. So there is no one yet who knows they want to respond to Federico in the third session on the Hegel text. Okay, now we'll see about that. And then in the fourth session so far, we have Victor, who is presenting on the notion of value and spirit, the relation of Hegel and Postone. And Raphael is respondent for that. And Raphael,
I'm responding and presenting, right? On
and you present on the Postone text, on Lukács traditional Marxism, and so on. And does anyone want to respond to that presentation?
I could respond on.
Yeah. Okay, no problem.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah. David, do you maybe already know a date where you want to present?
Is there a Hegel text that we need a presenter for? Sorry, I lost the thread a bit.
I think we still have a lot of Hegel texts that do not have presenters yet.
Right. Well,
for example, in the second session, we don't have anybody yet who presents on the Hegel text.
And that's going to be on essence. Is that right?
Transition from being to essence. Yes.
Well, I could give it a try. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
You can also take, if you want, just one topic. For example, identity or contradiction or reflection.
Oh, but I just saw that then we have 4 presenters in the second session, and that's a bit much.
We should probably have limit to 3 at most.
Yeah. And or is it David? Is it also okay if you present in the 4th session on the Hegel text, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I could try that. That will be in the 4th session. That will be on the logic of the concept, I suppose.
Andrei?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I could.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can respond to that one in the 4th session. That the Hegel text, David's Hegel text on the 4th session.
Okay, so everyone responds there. Okay. So we already have 3 presentations per session, and almost all of them have respondents already, but we still have a lot of people who are not registered for example, okay.
Eric, I'll take a rain check on my presentation and response selection. I have to give a read to about text to see.
Okay. So
yeah.
I think so far we have to drop the 3 maximum if everybody wants to do a presentation and a response.
I mean, I've never been in a new center class that everyone, you know.
Yeah. No, I just want to make clear that if you don't do a presentation and a response, you don't get the credit points. So that's clear for everybody. And who doesn't want to do, that's totally fine by me. That's their decision. And just that we give everybody at least a chance to get the credits. That's all I'm
right. Yeah, I
want to make
think
clear.
A lot of people aren't students, so they're just auditing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. No, but everybody in the Zoom right now. Yeah.
But I mean, if you're auditing, you don't take it for credit.
Yeah, but I don't already even see people who are auditing in the Zoom right now. Everybody who is in the Zoom in the stream is taking the class actually.
For credit? Okay.
No.
At least they are panelists.
Yeah, I mean, I'm auditing it, for instance. I'm not taking it for credit, but and I've done in past classes, like you can audit a course and not take it for credit, but be a panelist. It's like
Okay.
There's auditing, and there's auditing by like what? There's two kinds of auditing.
Okay, so you do presentations but don't get credits.
Yeah. I mean, it's
but I mean,
it's like minimum credits for the major. It's to get into the weeds of how like the classes and the organizational structure of graduating on time in 2 years has been restructured. We don't need to get into it in detail.
Yeah.
So I'll just say that everyone may not respond because it's not part of like their philosophy cluster.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So then the only presentation we don't have a respondent so far for is in the third session, Federico's Hegel presentation.
Okay, I'll do that then. And
Carl, don't you already respond? You already respond to Reggie's. Oh no, Reggie's is responding to you. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So you don't have a response yet. Okay.
Yes. So.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, don't worry.
Okay.
I reckon it's a lot too.
Yeah, I mean it's the first time, but okay. So I think we can. Oh, it's 7:30 p.m. here. So
just one more thing.
Yeah.
Also respondent session. Does anybody do a presentation on Hegel in the second session of the logic of essence?
So far not.
I think it's not okay to have 3 presentations, all of them being Hegel.
I thought it was David.
Maybe we can.
It's in the fourth session. David is on the fourth session, not the second session.
Yes, I understood. I would just present in the fourth session only.
Yes, no, you are in the fourth session, not in the second. But Victor, we don't have someone presenting the Hegel text in the second session yet.
Okay.
Do you maybe want to do this, or
I already have a presentation. I want to have a respondent session.
Okay.
That's why.
Yeah. You are also in the fourth session. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think I think the best way to do it is the following. I'll note this down like this. I'll make the list of respondent and presenters public in the classroom so everybody can see it. Everybody can be reminded, okay, when is my turn? And if somebody decides, okay, no, I want to do another response, another presentation, I want to do get the credits, they can just comment in the classroom and I can change that in the organizing sheets. Yes. Okay. Andrei, it was a lovely first session. Any end words?
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all. It was the first time when I did this, so I'm excusing myself also for I don't know, maybe incoherence or something. I hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for your patience, especially for having to hear me for 1 hour and a half. I think that must not go well. Okay, so if you want to talk to me about presentations, write to me, get ratings, anything, you can write me. I think I have now a New Center email address. You can get in contact with me with feedback, questions, everything you want.
I think we also have the group chat on Facebook for everybody who's on Facebook.
Yes, so write me. I will answer. I will check the group and the email every day. So it should be working well.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrei.
And thank you everybody for being here, and have a great rest of the day. Wherever you are.
You too.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great. Bye.